I grew up in the time of the great animated revival of Disney, the Disney animated films. So Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, and then the one with my favorite music, The Little Mermaid. I love the music, far superior in my mind to the music in the live remake, which is something I would defend with an irrational degree of enthusiasm. But also, while I love the music, it's not something I actually enjoy watching anymore because I find it hard to watch because I just want to reach out and ask, like, why can't you write something down that says, like, just kiss me and I'll explain, or just grab them and just like kiss them and be done with it and then explain. Like it's just frustrating to me. It's a plot point that doesn't make sense. I also struggle because there are some moments where the characters, I know they're animated, I should just get over it, but they kind of make a fool of themselves. And I'm thinking of one particular moment when Ariel sits down to dinner for the first time with the prince of the movie, Prince Eric, and she sees something she recognizes. She sees, well, a fork. And the best that she could tell, not having ever seen one used, evidently everything you eat in the sea is finger food. She grabs the fork and she uses it. And she uses it in a way that, it works, but it's not really the intended use. She uses it to start like brushing her hair out. And then everyone looks at her and it's a little bit strange. It's an odd moment. Then it goes on and moves on in big Disney finish, marriage, prince, etc. What we have today in Scripture we're going to be looking at in Matthew 5 is Jesus addressing something that's being misused. A fork that's being used to brush your hair. Like it can work, like it's not completely irrational, but it doesn't really work out well in the long run, right? And so Jesus isn't talking about how to use a fork. Jesus is talking about how to use the law. You see, he was having this discussion with the Pharisees about how they use the law. What they understand the law to do is to be used to keep people in line. Don't do anything else. Don't do anything wrong or else the law will get you. Right? The law is scary and intimidating and not to be messed with. You don't mess with the law. Right? This is how the Pharisees saw the law as something to control people. You follow it out of fear, and when you break the law, you feel guilty about it. And from this point of view of the law, Jesus looks like the bad guy because Jesus is doing things that break the law. He doesn't keep Sabbath correctly, legally. He's messed up fasting. Right? He doesn't wash properly before meals. He's eating with the wrong people. This view of the law, this way of using it, was not how it was originally understood, how it was originally given. God, going back to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, it was a gift given by God to a group of ragtag former slaves who need to learn a new way to live because the way they knew how to live as slaves was not going to serve them well. It was teaching them on how they might become people of peace, at peace with each other and at peace with God. It was the law that would point them in the right direction, how they should walk as God's people on the way to take possession of the land that God has given them. To support this goal, the law has this balance between the needs of individuals and the needs of the whole community. And so, yes, individuals have the freedom to do as they desire, but that has its limits for the good of the whole people. And there were certain leverages and responses, and even might call them punishments, that could be used to keep things in place as a peaceable people. The purpose of the law was to point people towards being these people of peace. And this started, though, to be lost as the law was, instead of being seen as a gift given to people to guide how they lived, it became over the centuries something that threatened. Follow the law or else. One way to think about what a huge difference this makes is to ask yourself two questions. Right? What's the most important thing you have ever done out of fear or guilt or shame? Right? The first question. Right? What is the most impressive thing you have ever done out of fear or guilt or shame? And I'm going to guess the answer is that nothing really comes to mind. When the law is understood in this negative sense as something that threatens, something that controls, the best it can do is keep people from being too bad. It keeps people mediocre, right? Driving, the law keeps us from speeding too much, right? But that's kind of what it accomplishes. Whereas the second question would be, what's the most impressive thing you have done out of love or awe or reverence? Doing something because it's simply beautiful. And I think that's a different type of answer. There are things we have done, things we have wrought, things we have crafted and created out of love, out of a sense of fascination, out of a sense of caring for each other. Right? If the law is something that we avoid because it causes shame and guilt, then at best we will all be mediocre. If the law is doing something else, if it's pointing us towards a better way of life, a life as the people of God at peace, then it is something that is beautiful. That's a whole different matter. What Jesus is doing in this section of the Sermon on the Mount is reclaiming the law, declaring that he fulfills the law as it was meant to be, that the law is meant to guide people towards loving God and loving neighbor, not out of a sense of fear, not to try to make people feel guilty, but to point towards what is beautiful. He makes this claim against what the Pharisees were teaching, right? The Pharisees were teaching a way to just kind of get by. And Jesus is saying, no, we can do better. Right? This is not about keeping everyone mediocre. This is about striving and becoming beautiful. He gives examples of this difference, right? That help us sort of see this. That make no sense if the law is something to fear, but make perfect sense if it's seen as a guide to being different and living a satisfying, peaceful life. We're going to take a look at some of those examples. Adultery. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The Pharisees had taught that it was not a sin till you had done it. So you can think about adultery all you want, as long as you don't commit it. This is like thinking about like a dog that snaps at every single person who walks by, who is trying to get out, who is getting close and snapping and barking and threatening people, but hasn't actually bitten anyone yet. We wouldn't call that dog good. We just say that dog hasn't been bad yet, right? If the law is the chain that holds the dog back from actually getting at someone, I mean, that's not a bad thing. I'd rather that dog have a chain than not have a chain. But wouldn't it be better to have a dog you don't have to worry about biting anyone ever and not need the chain, right? Don't have a dog on a chain, have a good dog. That's similar to adultery, the logic here. The impulse to commit it will lead to doing it, right? Like a dog that snaps at everyone will eventually get a chunk of someone's leg. So lowering our standards and finding ourselves rationalizing, excusing such behavior, thinking and fantasizing leads to people doing it. So don't go down that path. Remember, the law is not trying to be a chain that restrains us from being bad. It's trying to be a guide on how to be peaceful and good. So don't commit adultery. That part of the law is not saying, at least keep your pants on even if you think about it. The law says don't commit adultery as a way of pointing out that don't even think about it. Because the goal is to become people who couldn't even imagine doing it. Be so focused on your spouse, so wrapped up in how beautiful and gracious and what a gift they are that you just don't have eyes for anyone else, right? Don't be a bad dog, be a good dog. Don't even need the chain, right? Divorce, what Jesus says about that is closely linked. At the time, the practice had become you get married as a way to be able to shack up, and then you can get divorced. And it's legal. Everything's legal, right? Nothing's bad has happened there. If you give the woman a written notice that she was divorced, then her reputation was preserved. Your reputation was preserved, and Jesus calls this out and says, stop it. Don't get married and then get divorced, making a mockery of the law. The law is meant to point you towards a lifetime of marriage together. Don't just meet the letter of the law. The letter of the law is not about not getting caught. not getting in trouble. The law is pointing people towards becoming people who are at peace with each other, and that peace begins in the family, right? Get married with every intention of being married until death do you part, and let that be your approach. Oaths. Jesus has a word about that. Oaths were being treated in a similarly cavalier fashion. For you see, oaths were regarded as being as strong as that which they were sworn on. So if I swore by the hair on my head, that could be an oath. But then the oath would only be as strong as my hair would be. And my hair is easily cut, and so that oath would be easily broken. It would be a weak oath, right? Something more stronger would be, I swear by the land we walk on. That's not likely to go anywhere. That's a stronger oath. Or even stronger yet, I swear by the heavens above, right? That'd be a more impressive oath. So there was this game to play that had developed at the time to try to swear by the weakest thing you could get away with, so you were not as strongly bound by the other person on the other side of the oath, the other side of the relation. If I'm making an oath to you, you're making an oath to me, we're making an agreement, right? So I would try to swear by the weakest thing I could get away with and corner you into swearing by the strongest thing I could get you to swear by. And it was a way to get ahead contractually, right? And then you could always put the caveat on it, if the Lord wills, right? So if you don't do it, then obviously, I'm sorry, I swear by the permanence of the depths of the seas. But if the Lord wills, and if you don't do it, then obviously the Lord didn't will it, so that was your get out of jail free card. Jesus cuts through all this. Let your yes be yes, let your no be no. No games, no word tricks. The goal of the law is not to see who can play the most impressive word trick on another, but to form people whose words are just trustworthy, right? And in a time when, well, how many terms and conditions apply? Isn't that a horrible phrase, right? Terms and conditions apply. How about we're people who follow Jesus? I don't need terms and conditions if I make an agreement with you, because my yes is yes and my no is no. We shake hands and we live by it, because that is how we function between ourselves as Christians, right? No games. Jesus continues, you have heard the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother or sister shall be guilty before the court. Whoever shall say to his brother, Raka, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court, and whoever shall say, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. Jesus says this, and it takes a moment to get our minds around it. To start, remember that for Jesus, motivation is as important as deed, right? What we think matters, because what we think is connected to what we will do. There's a connection between how we think about people and how we treat people. And so if I'm able to go to a brother or a sister and call them Raka, or a fool. And really, if I'm going to pronounce it more accurately, there's a guttural at the end of it. Raka. I don't really get it quite right, but you kind of get that at the end, like you're kind of clearing your throat, like you're getting ready to spit, like Raka. I'd have to practice it to get it right, but that's sort of like, if you're calling someone a fool, like it's a precursor, like spitting on them. And that is kind of what Jesus is getting at here, right? To go from calling someone by name to calling someone a fool to spitting on them is the steps that go from I'm going to treat people right to I'm not sure what I think about them to I think lesser of them. All right? Once we start thinking lesser of people, once we start thinking that people are stupid or fools or lesser, they're not fully human, they're not like us, we're right and they're wrong, that leads down some dark paths, right? And against that, like we say, all people bear the image of God. Calling people names is a real problem. The contempt of seeing other people as less than lets us dismiss them. Remember, the purpose of the law is not to stop people from getting caught, but to point towards becoming and being good. So it's not only don't murder, It's don't hold others in the contempt such that we would look down on them and we would name call and spit on them such that we would treat them lesser. And Jesus has this, wraps it up with this comment, like if you ended up in this dark spot, if you've ended up in a spot where you are broken in your relationship with another, if you are presenting your offering at the altar and you remember your brother has something against you, leave, go first be reconciled to your brother, and then come back to worship. If we are angry, if we're festering or bitter or holding a grudge, right, to withdraw and pull back and let it get worse, it's a temptation. And Jesus tells us to not. Right? The most important thing to do, what the law is directing us to do, is go get straight with other people. Even if it means leaving worship to go take care of it. Make peace. The peace, as I said, the law is what points people how to live at peace with each other and with God. To become peaceable people that not only wouldn't murder, but wouldn't even insult each other. So what we see in this passage here is that Jesus, having sort of laid out the path to follow him, follow the path towards the kingdom, blessed are, here's the blessed path, so to speak. Now Jesus is reclaiming the law for its purpose, its intended purpose, to point us towards being peaceable. Right? The law is not a chain to grab us, pull us back before we manage to sink our teeth into each other, but is something to direct us so that we don't need the chain at all, right? And so I would invite you to pick a person that is the most inspiring to you when it comes to this, right? Do you know people who are gracious, wise, and beautiful, right? And to look at them and ponder how the law has shaped their lives, right? Look at what is possible in the life of someone who follows Jesus. I think of a particular couple, like the couple I think of really were the first to like crystallize this for me, were Wendell and Vondine Quigley. I was their pastor when I was at Mount Zion over at Lake Nahe, and they were not a perfect couple. I knew them for years, and they weren't perfect, but they were wise, and they were gracious, and they were kind, and they were patient with each other and with others. And I was asked by the family, I did Wendell's funeral. And what I shared with that family, and I've shared since then, is that when Wendell would help me serve communion, and as people came forward, what I realized over time was that I thought he was helping me, but what was really happening is that I was helping him, because he was already much further down the path that Jesus is laying out here. That Wendell had lived a life such that he didn't need a chain to keep him from snapping at people. He just never would. His life, in the end, was a life of someone transformed by following Jesus, being transformed by paying attention to the law and taking it seriously and being guided by it, such that I will live the rest of my life looking at people like Wendell and Vondine and praying and hoping that I might become more like them, people who live the law as Jesus lays out here. This is how it ought to be lived. The law is not here to make us good enough, to keep us from biting each other. The law is here to help us become just good. It's my prayer that the Spirit might move in each of us, that we would become profoundly good, and that we would have saints to look towards, like Wendell and Vondine, to inspire us as we do so. Amen.